Israel, according to a study published last week, has had one of the world's most effective responses. There's much speculation as to why this is the case. So we are looking forward to gaining insight on how the Jewish state has dealt with the pandemic and what other countries can learn from its response. Israel's handling of the crisis is all the more impressive in light of the political limbo it has been in for over a year. After going to the polls 3 times with inconclusive results, the country is still in the process of building a government coalition. Even the fact that after Benny Gantz, against the backdrop of the corona pandemic, recently agreed to enter a coalition government with Prime Minister Netanyahu, it looked like that Israelis would be going to the polls for the fourth time. However, media reports from the past hour indicate that there may have just have been a breakthrough, so our discussion could not be more timely. So maybe the ambassador could give an up-to-the-minute update on political development, and with political uncertainty in mind, help answer how Israel has managed not only to combat the coronavirus, but to become an international leader. To discuss these and other questions, we are pleased to welcome Jeremy Issacharoff, who has been Israel's ambassador to Germany since 2017. Previously, Ambassador Issacharoff served as the Senior Deputy Director General for Strategic Affairs at the Foreign Ministry and then as Vice Director General. He also has over a decade's worth of experience serving in the United States. Ambassador, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. And please allow me to add that we at the American Jewish Committee are delighted to see that you have fully recovered from the coronavirus. Finally, while there are many friends of Israel and the AJC on this call from around the world, I'm particularly happy that your good friend, our CEO, David Harris, is also with us today to provide some closing remarks. Ambassador Issacharoff, we're eagerly waiting to hear from you. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. A few things I'll say, and then we can open it up for questions, and I'll be happy to engage into a conversation. I think one of the first things I should say is that this evening and tomorrow we're going to be commemorating Yom HaShoah V'Hagvura in Israel, and we'll be also doing this in a very different way than we've done up till now. Probably there will be very few actual ceremonies in Israel. There will be very limited. And tomorrow in Germany, where we've always managed to conduct, I think, very moving and touching ceremonies. Last year, we did a ceremony in Sachsenhausen in the concentration camp, and the year before that in Bergen-Belsen. But tomorrow we shall do it by virtue of Zoom. And I think it's still incredibly important that we should remember. I think we have to never forget what has happened. And I think given the fact that there is still anti-Semitism in Germany, in Europe, and even in America, that we need to stand very strongly in terms of remembering and dealing with this past, because it is very relevant to the present. I think it's also important because it's very, we should remember our older senior citizens that are, some of them are survivors and some of them have been in the Holocaust and now they're by themselves. So I think it's a time that we should reflect and first of all, remember this very difficult situation in which we're in. I'd also say that in general terms, the coronavirus, as there was some press reports, I don't know how to judge them, that they said that Israel and Germany were the most successful in combating corona. And it might well be true, because I think both countries have had a pretty significant record in terms of dealing with this with this virus, which so little is known of, and doing it in a way that has managed not to eliminate the numbers going up, but at least to try and control them and to try and slow down the rates of people being infected and the amount of people getting better. And as you say, thank you very much. I was tested positive a month ago, and thank God after 2 weeks I tested negative. I think for me it was a very difficult time in terms of going through this, and also obviously first and foremost of being very cautious and very scared that I shouldn't infect anybody else who is close to me, my wife, my daughter, and my colleagues at work. And so thank God I didn't infect anyone to the best of my knowledge, and it was contained. But it means that people have to be disciplined. And I think in Israel, important to us to look at this as, Israel at the best of times has a number of national security threats that it has to face, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon, whether it's Iran, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Gaza, all of these different things. And in the end, the coronavirus could be considered a national security threat in the event that it would have spread in a very dramatic way and critically impacted our civilian life and our ability to manage all of the other problems that we have, all the actual national security threats that we have. So from our point of view, it was imperative, and we had one advantage that, for example, Europe doesn't have, that we can close our borders. And from an early time, the borders were closed. People were tested, people were isolated, and basically the rules of self-isolation, and even now the staying at home throughout Pesach, people who live together in one family is one thing, but you cannot congregate outside of the house, whether for prayer, whether for social purposes, or any other purposes. So it's the limitations were very, very significant. So I think that in the reality of Israel, what Israel did was very tough. We used even technological means in order to monitor people who were in isolation and shouldn't go out, or people who were infected. So I think that these were extraordinary means in a very extraordinary time. In Germany, I'd say in general, you have a health system which has been very effective in testing. I mean, they're testing something in the region of 500,000 tests a week, close to 100,000 a day. They're also you're talking about a country of about, let's say, maximum 90 million people. They have 40,000 ICU emergency beds available. And this is quite a very high level of readiness. Their medical ability is by no means it is being tested to a certain extent, but it's not being strained. And they still have a very effective way of testing and finding out where the hotspots are, and also inform who could have been infected and need to be in isolation. And I think this is one of the reasons that they were able to keep the numbers down and prevent a very, let's say, another Italy, Spain, or even the United States. But again, they also have a medical infrastructure that is very impressive and can still take a lot of heat. But we're beginning to see the numbers, as we're beginning to see in Israel, in both countries, seem to be reaching a certain level, and we're clearly seeing that more people are being cured rather than being infected. So I'm not a medical expert, and all I can say is that I hope that we will get through this as soon as possible. Just to say a few words, tempts me to carry on talking about the corona, but to talk about the coalition negotiations, it's as you know, we've been through our third election. Benny Gantz was, after the election, asked by the president, was given the mandate to set up a government, and having in the middle declared that he wanted to set up a national emergency government with Benjamin Netanyahu. The conversations continued, but they did not come to an agreement before the 28 days expired. There was a kind of like 24 or 48-hour extension, but at the end of the day, as up to this minute, there are also bits and pieces in the paper that they're close to an agreement and maybe not so close. So I think it's still too early to judge, because in effect, the mandate that was given to Benny Gantz has expired. And it means now that the mandate is in the hands of the Knesset. And you will need 61 members of Knesset that have to come together and agree in order to set up a government. And if that government is not set up by whoever will command a majority of 61 members of Knesset, then it will automatically go to elections, a fourth election, which could well be the situation. It is very difficult to see at this time what the dynamics will be and the different interests at play. It's very complicated. All I can say as a diplomat is that I wanted from the first election for there to be a functioning government. I can say very clearly that when it comes to issues of national security, I feel very safe and very sure that whatever needs to be done will be done. That's not the problem, but we need to also have a government that can function, decide, budget, appointments like you need in any other governmental democracy. And I think in this last year, a number of issues have come up in terms of the division of powers between the Knesset, between the Supreme Court. And I think one of the great things that inspire me about Israel and has always given me great confidence is the strength of our institutions. And so far, I think that they have held, they've been under strain, but it's not, Israel is not the only country in which this has happened. But I still think that this is one of the crucial factors. That first of all, we need to have a government that is established, but we need to also remain in a very reasonable, normal situation in which the separation of powers between the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature are respected and strengthened and kept in place. So maybe on that note, I'll be happy if there are any questions, be happy to take them on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Maybe I use my privilege as moderator to ask the first question. You talked about Israel's security situation. Can you maybe give us an idea on how virus is affecting Israel's security situation in the region? I mean, you mentioned Hezbollah in the north, and I mean, we have Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And how is this affecting Israel's security?
I think one of the positive elements of this is that there's been quite strong coordination between us and the Palestinian Authority about this, the spread of this disease. And I think that is possibly one of the good elements that can come out of this. I think the Palestinian Authority realizes very clearly that cooperation with us is essential. We've provided monetary aid, substantial monetary aid to the Palestinian Authority, and where we can provide material and protective clothing and other instruments that could be helpful to them in dealing with this. I think this is really the way to go. And we've been, I really think that this is, and it seems like the numbers in the West Bank are something in the region of about over 130, but a number of people have recovered. We're also very mindful of the situation in Gaza. Now, the situation in Gaza and our contacts, obviously, with the powers that be in Gaza are different to the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority helps the situation in Gaza, But we are working very closely with the UN Special Coordinator Mladinov, who has a 60-day plan for dealing with Gaza. And look, we cannot just say we don't care about what's happening in Gaza. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a place where this plague could really break out in a very dramatic way. So we will also do whatever we can to prevent that. And so far, we've been trying to work a lot with the UN and the international community in containing and getting as much aid as possible that can be given to Gaza and to prevent any major outbreak there. But in general, I'd say Jordan, the situation in Jordan has been, they've taken some pretty tough steps, and it seems to be working. Egypt, the situation I think is a lot more complex, and I think also the economic impact. I mean, when a country that lives so much off tourism, the economic impact is cutting across, and it's very difficult at this point to see the exact situation in terms of the medical factors, but it's something that we'll have to see over time. You know, we're also approaching Ramadan, and it's going to be very interesting to see how the Arab governments throughout the Middle East, I mean, a lot of them, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt have forbidden prayers, and there won't be the Muslim authorities in Jerusalem. There won't be prayers in the mosque. These people will pray from home, and all of the ceremonies around the iftar will be limited. So this is also going to have an impact on Arab society in the coming days, where you also see a difference between the Shia approach, which is maybe willing to allow people more flexibility, not in fasting, and the Sunni, which is a bit more stricter. But it's, at the end of the day, I think, again, this overall situation, in a way, puts Israel in a very positive light, because at the end of the day, people see that Israel can help its neighbors, even ones where we have really deep political problems, but we put that aside and look at the humanitarian aspect first. And I would say that I hope that they also look at the humanitarian aspect as well from our point of view. And one of the things that I've been dealing with a lot in the last few months since President Rivlin came to Berlin is the issue of our missing soldiers and 2 citizens that are taken and in Hamas in Gaza. And I really hope that this crisis might generate an opportunity by which we can bring Hadar Goldin and Oren Shahul back to a proper burial. And I would also urge anyone who's listening in to bear that in mind and keep this in your agenda and in your sensitivities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Maybe just a quick follow-up question. Is this in any way the situation of the coronavirus affecting the readiness of the Israeli defense forces? And how's the IDF in general dealing with this situation?
No, I think that from that point of view, we're pretty much in good shape, and you will have noticed that there have been, in the last period of time, even a little before the corona crisis, but during, I think there were rocket attacks from Syria, and you saw that our response was very, very quick and very devastating against Iranian targets within Syria. And by the way, I didn't mention the situation of the coronavirus in Iran, which continues to be very serious, and they are having a very tough time of it and are using that in order to try and weaken the amount of sanctions that other countries, particularly the United States, are exercising vis-a-vis Iran. But I think I have no doubt that if we identify any threat to our national security from whatever quarter, whether it's Iran in Syria, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's Hamas, this is not a time to test our resolve. It will be very tough, very quick, and very decisive.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Question from the audience. You already touched on it, but maybe you can elaborate a bit more. Do you see a chance that the coronavirus will advance peace efforts in the Middle East by fighting the virus together?
It's not impossible. I mean, look at the best of times. You know, Israel has a web of relations under the table with a whole range of different countries. Look, we have peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan. And underlying those peace treaties is a very intense, very intimate security cooperation between the countries. We have contacts beyond that, that not only in the security and in the intelligence area, but also, again, for example, a country like Jordan is a critical national security interest for Israel. So if we can help the Jordanians on whatever matter that contributes to their stability and their welfare, then we have no hesitation in doing so. Or if we can do it ourselves, we will do it. And if not, we'll talk to other countries in order to encourage them to help as well. And in that context, I can say that Germany's been very supportive of Jordan. Now, even as I said, before the whole corona crisis, I think if you go to the Gulf countries, you've seen visits of the Prime Minister to Oman, and there have been a myriad of other contacts that we have with other Gulf countries, which I prefer not to name, but there is a very strong realization that Israel is a very major partner, potentially in high tech, in many different areas. And they already see, I think, Israel as a very positive factor in the area. They still obviously want to have a solution to the Palestinian problem, but I think already there's a sense that Israel is a potentially great partner for them in a whole range of different areas. So I think that it's possible, and there have been some reports that Professor Gershoni, an Israeli professor, has moved along to advanced testing stage of vaccine. Still think it's going to take a bit of time, but I definitely think that what Israel does in the area of corona and using its innovation power, its medical infrastructure, if we can find something that could contain this outbreak, we will do it, and I have every confidence that we will share it with the other countries in the region. And we've also had other cooperations with those countries in areas of our own medical procurement. So I want this corona to go away, but I also think, like we say, the Chinese say that in every crisis there's an opportunity, and I really hope that we can expand an opportunity here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The next question actually relates to China. Can you talk about the relationship between China and Israel more broadly, and especially now during the pandemic?
Look, broadly speaking, our relationship with China is we have a full embassy there functioning, and we have very vibrant bilateral relations across the board, a great deal of cooperation in terms of civilian areas. To be very frank, our relations with China in the military area are very, very limited, if pretty much non-existent. But we've been able to find cooperation with China on many different levels in areas of Mashav, which is our international aid organization, And there's also been, I'd say, in the commercial trade area, high-tech area, there can be a great deal of potential there. Of course, like with other countries that are talking now, one of the major issues in Europe and America and is this whole issue of the 5G network and how they will deal with Huawei and the Chinese involvement in the 5G network. This is a very tough subject. I can tell you that in Europe, the feeling is, look, there's a core part of the 5G that we can't allow Huawei to be part of, but there are other peripheral elements of the network that we can allow them. And there's a lot of complications here and complexities of security of the system and your ability to protect yourself, but also what measures of how can you also deal with the setting up of such a major network through European countries that don't necessarily have the same abilities that Huawei has? And how do you guarantee that in the coming years that Europe will have a major role to play in terms of having that infrastructure, in terms of the telecommunications market? And obviously, we're following this very closely. We're being very cautious in what we do. We're reviewing our cooperation with China on various levels in terms of, for example, purchases of China, major Chinese investments in our civilian infrastructure or potentially dual-use infrastructure. So we're looking at it carefully, we're following it, but I'd say in general terms, our relations with China are, I'd say, pretty cordial, pretty reasonable, but we're, how do I say, really, we look to China with respect, but with caution.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Just a quick reminder for everyone watching this webinar, you can submit your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. The next question from the audience, on the note of vaccines, how is Israel working with the international community, particularly Germany and Europe, and how is Israel cooperating with finding a vaccine? And maybe you can also elaborate a bit more about the German-Israeli relationship against the backdrop of the corona pandemic.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that one, if there is any positive aspect of this, has been actually the cooperation between Germany and Israel. Here we have sought the assistance of Germany. The foreign minister gave an interview the other day that they brought back 250,000 Germans from around the world. And I know that Lufthansa had put on about almost 500 flights and also brought back themselves, just this company, 90,000 Germans. And we approached the German government that has a far greater reach to also help us in getting Israeli citizens back to Israel. They were very positive about it. They even said clearly that as far as they're concerned, Israeli citizens will be considered as German citizens. And they were very helpful in helping us in bringing back from Latin America, from New Zealand. And this was very much appreciated. I would like to say that this was raised in a foreign minister conversation between Heiko Maas and Israel Katz, but also the deputy foreign minister, Neil Zanan, was very, very instrumental and helpful in helping us facilitate this, this cooperation. We also had a cause to help the Germans. They had a number of German citizens in the West Bank and in Gaza. And they asked us to help facilitate them, which is a complicated situation at the best of times, but less so with the West Bank, but more with Gaza. But we were happy to help them, and we were able to facilitate the passage of these citizens out of the territories. We've been talking to the German companies about assistance in medical procurement. We have an office in the embassy that is very, very busy with requests, and we've had some pretty good cooperation with the government there. So I'd say in general terms, we're talking, both of us are talking a lot about the exit strategies. I think we both feel that each country has made the right steps in dealing with Corona, so that we would probably begin to think in the same way about how do you begin to exit this crisis. So from that point of view, I think, to my mind, the cooperation has really brought out the best of the relationship. And this is following a couple of years in which the cooperation has become so much more stronger in so many different areas, in military area, intelligence exchange, the cyber area, advanced scientific research. And I really do hope, I always say that I don't know if Israel has all the answers. I don't know if Germany has all the answers, but together, our infrastructures are so incredible that we can really have a really good potential to try and find. And I hope that potential will be indeed guided towards finding a vaccine. So I think that's really going to be the game changer, of this whole crisis. And as I said before, people in Israel are working very strongly. Listen, getting a vaccine takes time. It's not something that happens in the movies. It happens from one day to the next. In reality, it's a lot more complicated than that. But I think there is absolutely no doubt that whatever Israel and Germany can do to cooperate in that vein, they will do it do it with great vigor and great determination.
Thank you, Ambassador. So the next question that we have from the audience is about Iran sanctions. You already touched on it. What's your position on the calls also from Germany and Europe to ease the economic sanctions against Iran right now, or to help the Iranian people to overcome the situation?
Look, I think, there's no doubt that Iran has been very heavily hit by this crisis. And I think that I'm not surprised that, countries in Europe will feel and want to help Iran from a humanitarian point of view. I'll be honest with you. Look, we're not in a situation where diplomacy is working. I mean, I have a lot of phone calls every day, but we're not actually meeting. And so means of communication are limited in terms of the substance that we can talk about. But my impression is that, first of all, is that if there is a concern in Europe, it is mainly geared towards humanitarian, provided that the economic sanctions shouldn't prevent humanitarian or medical aid going to Iran. And personally, I think something that is clearly and cannot be used or manipulated in any other way, but it's assistance that goes directly to dealing with this outbreak and dealing with this illness, the COVID-19. I think that is something that one would have to consider. Look, I mean, we are even encouraging countries to help Malatnov in terms of what he can do vis-a-vis Hamas. Look, in the end, I mean the situation in Hamas and in Gaza. So, I mean, this is, this outbreak will know no borders. And from that point of view, I think we'll be, open to ideas. But I think it's important not to have this be used as a means of releasing the economic sanctions, of stopping the process that was begun, the the DRM, the dispute resolution mechanism that was mandated by the JCPOA. I'm very worried that the supervision in Iran on the nuclear program should remain as tight as possible. But we know that the Iranians are continuing to enrich uranium. And that I don't see, or I haven't seen any indication that the efforts they've had in terms of enriching uranium, in terms of research, in terms of advanced centrifuges, I don't see any of these activities have stopped. And so therefore I would hope that the international community will still take a really tough stance vis-a-vis Iran on these issues, and also in terms of its involvement in Syria as well. I think we can't afford to take our eye off the ball. I don't think the Iranians are, with all their problems, they're not taking their eye off the ball.
Thank you. Next question from one of our board members. There was information about problems regarding corona measures in the Jerusalem quarters where ultra-Orthodox Jews live. Is that under control?
Well, I think it seems to me that there is, there obviously is a problem in terms of the more religious communities. And it's, to be honest, I can see in other religious communities, in other religions, in other places in the world, this is, the issue of being together, being in communities is a problem. I think you even have, to a certain extent, a problem in, the United States in that area. But I think, and look, there's also, for example, in Israel, we don't have the, the physical expanse like you have in a country like Germany or in the United States. And people living in religious neighborhoods, it could be Mea Shearim in Jerusalem, could be Bnei Barak near Tel Aviv. You're talking about people that live in small apartments, maybe around 100 meters, mother and father and 7 or 8 kids. And it's a really difficult environment to be. And, you try and be in a small 100-meter apartment with 8 kids, I don't envy. So, I think we have to be, aware of what the constraints are. But I think this was, that in this sector, it wasn't sufficient. The danger of the virus wasn't sufficiently felt in the beginning stages, but I hope that it's beginning now to see, a very important religious figure, former chief rabbi of Israel, died of the coronavirus, and also that has an impact. But then people want to go to the funeral, and the dangers. It needs a lot of discipline. People really need to pull together, and I think by and large, thank God, I think the situation in Israel could have been a hell of a lot worse, and I think the measures in many ways did prove themselves.
Thank you. So the next question that we have is circling back to German-Israeli relationship. Where do you see and how do you see the future of the Israeli-German relationship? Maybe also beyond Corona and...
Look, as I said before, we're commemorating today the Holocaust, which in Hebrew is like the day of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, and of Gvura, which is bravery, heroism. And, as ambassador of Israel to Germany, there's hardly one day that goes by that somehow the Holocaust doesn't come across your desk or your mind. And so, in a way, it's like every day you think about it. And to be honest with you, a lot of my German friends and colleagues raise the issue constantly. And you go and you think you know a lot about the Holocaust, but then the more you read about it, the more you encounter it, you just cannot believe, and I'm going to say this tomorrow in the speech I give, the depths of depravity that the Nazi regime got to. And it's just impossible to even understand how a country of such incredible civilization and culture could have reached that depth of depravity. And having said all that, I'm even more amazed that 75 years later, at the beginning of this year, we went with President Steinmeier, the president of Germany, to Jerusalem, to the Yad Vashem memorial. And he had to give an impossible speech. There were the Brits, President Rivlin, the Prince Charles, Macron, Vice President Pence, and Putin. I mean, it's quite an audience. And then the German president had to speak. I think he gave one of the most amazing speeches. And then a few days later, we went to Auschwitz. President Rivlin went to Auschwitz. We came back from Auschwitz to Berlin. And I think it was an amazing sight to see both presidents together standing at the Brandenburg Gate. And also the speeches in the Bundestag, in the German parliament. So, first of all, I think, when you look back, it's really tough. But when you look at today and how far we've gone in building a relationship, and I want you to know that there are things that we're working with the Germans today that we don't do with any other country. And we have a very intimate cooperation. We have a great deal of trust. We have very great confidence in terms of intelligence exchange and working together. And as I said, I think one of the big major pillars of our cooperation is in advanced scientific research between Weizmann Institute, Technion, and other, Fraunhofer, Helmholtz, the German Max Planck, so Hebrew University, a lot of these, it's incredible the amount of cooperation. So in one sense, it's very difficult to be here, especially on Yom HaShoah, especially because of the Holocaust. But I must say, I'm very inspired to see what a distance we've made from that time, from that horrific period to where we are now. And in that sense, I feel very confident that with all the problems that we face with the issue of anti-Semitism, you still see the end of the day, the German leadership coming out incredibly strongly against these acts of anti-Semitism. Only today I traded tweets with Heiko Maas, the foreign minister, who made a point of making a special tweet for Yom HaShoah, which is basically a commemorative day in Israel, not necessarily in Germany. But he made this tweet, and it showed how he is committed to preserving their memory and fighting anti-Semitism. So I feel very confident about America, about Israeli-German relations, in the same way as I say naturally about Israeli-American relations.
Good. So one last question from the audience. 75 years after the Holocaust, some are calling for a normalization of relations between Israel and Germany. Of course, Germany's stated Staatsräson is Israel's security. How do you respond to those calling for normal relations?
I'll be honest with you. In my perspective, in my experience, we're way beyond normal. The relationship is probably the strongest relationship we have with Europe. In Europe, with the one of the most important countries in Europe. And I'd say today that the level of cooperation, we've had joint exercises with our Air Force. We're building submarines, a submarine in Kiel, and 4 missile boats there. The German cooperation with the use of Israeli drones for their security missions is very strong and very critical for their security. As I said, our intelligence exchange is very strong. I see I always thought that the relationship between Israel and Germany was strong, but since I've been here, I've discovered virtually every day another factor which shows me that it's even stronger than I thought. So, I mean, in my opinion, we're way beyond normal. And this is a very strong, I'd say, growing strategic partnership between the two countries. And again, I say, looking at the past, it's sometimes I can't even begin to explain how we could have been there and we're here today. But I think it's really, as I said, a story that gives a lot of hope and inspiration that you can make, some way of overcoming the past and not allowing that past to define our present. And before I kind of sign off, I just want to say how delighted I am to have done this conversation with you, but also I'm even more delighted to see that David Harris, my good friend who I have known for so long and has been such a great leader to the American Jewish community, but to, Israel-American relations. I'm so glad to see that he's been joining us, and it's always great to see him. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You've been generous with your time. And before I hand it over to David, maybe because we got one more question that is interesting to answer. What is your advice for young Jews living in Germany who wish to build a stronger relationship with Israel in this extraordinary times?
Well, first of all, it's something that I would say not only to the young Jews, but also to young Germans, come to Israel. And one of the things that I feel is one of the strategic challenges, not just for Israel-German relations, but I think a very major challenge for the Jewish people as a whole, is that we continue to strengthen the relationship with Germany. And I think that one of the critical factors in that will be to invest in a massive youth exchange between the two countries. I see young Germans coming to Israel. It has a massive impact on them. They go with a lot of trepidation and expectations of how can we go to Israel after the Holocaust and everything. And I must say that I think you can see the impact of it had on the quality of relations. So I would hope that we can dramatically expand that. I'd also like to see a kind of like a cooperative, mechanism whereby it could be also young American, German, Israelis, coming together. And I think they could create an amazing conversation that we'd all be very proud of.
Again, thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And before we wrap this conversation up, I will now hand it over to our CEO, your friend, David Harris. David, the floor is yours.
Remko, thank you very much. Thank you for organizing and hosting this really fascinating conversation with, as you heard, my good friend Jeremy. And it gives me a lot of personal pleasure as well, having followed Jeremy's career for decades, to see him in this absolutely vital diplomatic post in Berlin. There's no one better in the Israeli Foreign Service to fulfill that role. So Jeremy, a big shout out and a thank you to you. Jeremy mentioned on a couple of occasions the name Nikki Mladenov, the UN Secretary General's envoy in Israel and the region. And I want to tell the people on this call that this coming Friday at 11 a.m. New York time, AJC will be hosting a conversation with Nikki Mladenov, and everyone here is invited to join and listen in on that conversation. I simply want to make 3 quick points, Remko, before you wrap up. Number one, hearing this conversation again reminds me of how proud I am that in 1998, AJC became the first American Jewish organization to establish a full-time presence in Berlin. For me, as the son of Holocaust survivors, my father grew up in Wilmersdorf, a neighborhood of Berlin. It was not a simple decision. In a way, Jeremy expressed some of my contradictory thoughts as well, but it was the right decision. We've never looked back at AJC. Remko, I'm proud that you're the acting director, and I look forward in 2023 to marking the 25th anniversary. And number two, as some of you on this call know, as Jeremy certainly knows, we were going to hold something even bigger in June, the AJC Global Forum in Berlin for the very first time. We were being told in Germany that it would be the largest such Jewish advocacy event in post-war German history. We were sold out. We had a roster of amazing world leaders confirmed to come. Because of the coronavirus, because of the fact that some of us in New York cannot even go to the corner, much less to the airport, much less to Berlin, we've had to cancel. I'd like to think postpone, but for now cancel the global forum. But our commitment to and involvement with Germany continues on so many levels, from Berlin, from New York, from around the world. And finally, Jeremy referenced Yom HaShoah, the Day of Holocaust Remembrance. And in a very sort of interesting way, ironic way, I think the German expression is ein Treppenwitz der Weltgeschichte, the irony of history. In a way, Germans and Jews are united quite uniquely because of Holocaust memory and because of days like Yom HaShoah. At the end of the day, there are probably no two peoples on the planet who are more invested in Holocaust memory and in trying to understand the lessons, if perhaps for obvious reasons and opposing reasons. But I take from Yom HaShoah, as we finish this conversation, three fundamental lessons. Number one, for those who commemorated outside Israel, it's not enough to mourn dead Jews, though it's important. It's necessary to defend and protect living Jews as a sign of commitment. Number two, it is essential for those who mourn the Shoah to understand the centrality of Israel to Jewish safety, security, and well-being. No, Israel was not a result of the Shoah, but the Shoah underscored the necessity for a sovereign Jewish state, which had been in the dreams and aspirations of the Jewish people for nearly 2,000 years. And number three, again, Jeremy referenced it, the Shoah is also a reminder of the fragility of liberal democracy. What we think is solid and stable and enduring proved in the case of Germany to be fragile and vulnerable, and overnight collapsed. And in place of the democratic values of the Weimar Republic came the depravity and the bestiality on a scale never before seen in history, and hopefully never again. So it seems to me that on this day, every day, but this day in particular, the commitment to combating anti-Semitism by all of us, Jew and non-Jew alike, defending Israel's place in the world, and standing up for liberal democratic values as the best guarantor of the rights of all, Jews and non-Jews alike, are for me the central lessons that I hope we emphasize today and every day. Again, to you, my friend Jeremy, thank you. To you, Remko, and your team at AJC Berlin, great work, and look forward to future conversations.
Thank you, David. Again, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And as David has reminded me, I always forget to tell our audience that this is part of AJC's, this conversation is part of AJC's advocacy work online, since we're also limited in our work right now. So follow us on all the social media channels to get up-to-date information about the events that we have, that our colleagues in the US are organizing, that our colleagues in Paris, in Warsaw, in Europe, and in all other parts of the world are organizing. And I hope I see all of you soon in our next conversation. And again, Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being so generous with your time. And hopefully we'll meet again in the not so distant future.
Alavai.
Alavai.
Fine, great, lovely. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Bye, Jeremy. Bye, Remko.
Bye.
Bye, David. Bye-bye.